Good evening, everyone. Eric here in the garden. It's Saturday evening. I mentioned in some of my previous videos that our location is in eastern North Carolina. In fact, we're just about 3 miles from the ocean itself. So we did have Hurricane Dorian. Luckily, the eye for us was just off the coast. Unfortunately, it did impact the Outer Banks. We're certainly thinking about those folks, especially some of those that saw the severe storm surge on Ocracoke and also in Hatteras Village. As far as we're concerned, where I live, we did have some tropical storm force wind gusts. The point of this video is to show you a little bit of the impact on the rose garden. Not nearly the damage that I had with Florence. With Florence, this fence was down into the rose garden itself, and in total I lost 13 rose bushes. I'll talk about that in a second, because unfortunately a lot of those roses really didn't show up the damage in terms of the impacts until after the storm itself. So a few things we'll cover in this video: what was damaged and how you can prevent it. You can see most of the bushes are okay. A few canes are laid down. Here's Crescendo here, and again a single cane on that bush down. So overall, I'd say 80–85% of the garden was unscathed. The other thing I noticed, unlike Florence or even Michael, we tend to get a lot of storms here, the blooms still look good. We had a lot of thorn damage from the wind. Well, here's a little bit. I say that you can see a little bit of the thorn damage. There's a nice bee there, honeybee in the plant or flower, but you can see some of the thorn damage right there from the blooms whipping around in the wind. The focus of this video is going to talk about how you can prevent this. If you're expecting a big windstorm in your area, you want to cut down your canes. This is Veteran's Honor. This cane is about 6.5 feet long. You can tell the bush itself is about 7 feet tall. This cane over here broke from down near the base. You can see where it's still fresh. So this is right where the graft is itself. So I'm hoping that didn't cause any damage to the bud union. This is grafted on Fortuniana, so my graft is just about above the ground. And you can tell these are substantial canes on this bush, some an inch in diameter. Not too worried, because you can see all the other healthy ones that survived. So what could I have done differently? Well, for Florence, I took these bushes down at least a couple feet. So if they were 6 or 7 feet, I brought them down to 3 or 4. And what that did was that prevented a lot of these long canes that are broken. So that's something I could have done. By design, I did not do that on purpose. I think it helped a lot of my bushes with Florence. The wind gusts with Dorian were more like 50 to 55. With Florence, they were 80 to 90. So Florence was more severe in our immediate area, so I didn't feel the need to take these down. It was kind of a balance with, yes, what that does, it prevents the rocking motion. So when you have a cane this big, if you were to take off the top section of it, you don't have that rocking back and forth as much. When it's shorter, it can't rock back and forth as much. So it's a good thing to do, but what my line of thinking was, we weren't going to have as severe winds, and I didn't want to lose all that canopy, all those leaves, as we go into the fall. So yes, a couple canes are bent over. Yes, we lost a cane here on Veteran's Honor. It looks like a couple canes were lost on Claire Elise. You can see that right there. But by not taking the bush down, that probably was a little more likely. But what is left is a very healthy bush, because you still have a lot of canopy. As far as I see right now, the only bush that was blown over was Baby's Blush, and it might be hard to tell in this video, so I'm going to get around a different angle. And it doesn't look like much. I'm optimistic. Here's a cane of that's Mr. Caleb right there. So on this video it might not show up much. You might say, well, that doesn't look too bad, and I agree. That's Baby's Blush. If you look at the graph, it should be up and down, but it's more at an angle. It doesn't look like much, but if you look really carefully, these weeds seem to have exploded. I'll have to, but some of the roots have been disturbed. And again, I don't know if you can tell in the video, but this rootstock is at an angle now. Doesn't look like much. That happened to a fair amount of our roses during Florence, and I thought we escaped most of the damage, but in reality it weakens the plants. So what ended up happening was, over the course of a couple months, they slowly died. So it seems like if you break some of that root system from the graft, it will lead to a slow death. So optimistic that overall everything looks pretty good, but I have a feeling that baby's blush is going to decline with time. We'll see what happens. While we finish up this video, the blooms at our left are nice as Mr. Lincoln. I wish you could smell the fragrance. This is Dolly Parton. This is my mainly fragrance garden. There's Double Delight in there, which doesn't, well, that smells, but the behind it, Headliner, does not. So overall, things are looking pretty good. I'll wrap up with one last thing I want to show you. One of the roses that did get blown over during Florence, what I tend to do is just leave it alone. This is Marlin's Day. That looked about like what Baby's Blush did. The graft itself blew over. It's hard to tell that it's at an angle now, and new canes just emitted from it. It did have some dieback in the spring, which does seem to be enhanced when the bush is knocked over. So bottom line, if you're anticipating a windstorm in your area, and if you have time and you think it's gonna be really bad, you can help alleviate some things by bringing the height of the bush down. Otherwise, let things happen. Trim up your canes after the storm and see what happens. Keep them well watered and healthy going into the fall, and hopefully they'll recover. That's it in the garden. Appreciate everybody that has subscribed to the page so far, and comment below as always.